Sarah Martinez had been working at Fort Henderson for 3 years as a civilian contractor. Every morning she walked through the same security checkpoint, showed her badge to the same guards, and made her way to the communications building, where she managed the base's internet infrastructure. It was routine work, but Sarah took pride in keeping thousands of soldiers connected to their families back home. On that Tuesday morning in March, everything seemed normal. The sun was just rising over the desert landscape, casting long shadows across the military compound. Sarah arrived early, as she always did, carrying her laptop bag and a thermos of coffee. She had an important presentation to give to the base commanders about upgrading the network security systems. The first sign that something was different came when she noticed extra soldiers stationed around the main administrative building. They weren't the usual guards she recognized. These men wore different uniforms and had serious expressions that made her feel uneasy. Sarah tried to push the feeling aside. Military bases often had visitors and security drills. As she climbed the concrete steps leading to the main entrance, Sarah heard heavy footsteps behind her. She turned to see 3 soldiers approaching quickly. Their faces were stern, and they walked with purpose that made her heart race. She had never seen them before, and something about their demeanor sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of them called out. His voice was cold and official. "We need to speak with you." Sarah stopped on the steps, gripping her laptop bag tighter. "Is there a problem?" "I'm just heading to my office. I have clearance to be here." The lead soldier, a sergeant with piercing blue eyes, stepped closer. "Ma'am, you need to come with us for questioning. There are some concerns about your activities on the base." "What kind of concerns?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. She had always followed every protocol, every security measure. She couldn't imagine what they might be talking about. "That's not for discussion here," another soldier interrupted. "You need to come with us now." Sarah felt confused and frightened. She had done nothing wrong. Her job involved maintaining computer networks, helping soldiers communicate with their families, and ensuring the base's digital infrastructure ran smoothly. She had security clearance and had passed every background check. "Can I see some identification?" she asked, trying to stay calm. "I'd like to contact my supervisor and let them know where I'm going." The soldiers exchanged glances. The sergeant's expression hardened. "Ma'am, this is not a request. You will come with us immediately." Sarah's mind raced. She thought about the presentation she was supposed to give, about her co-workers who would be expecting her. She thought about her husband, David, who was still sleeping at home, unaware that his wife was about to face the most terrifying experience of her life. "I want to call my lawyer," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "I have rights even on a military base." That's when everything changed. The sergeant's patience seemed to snap. He stepped forward aggressively, and Sarah instinctively took a step backward. Her foot caught on the edge of the concrete step, and she felt herself losing balance. "Move," the sergeant shouted, and suddenly Sarah felt strong hands shoving her backward. The world seemed to slow down as she fell. She tumbled down the concrete steps, her laptop bag flying from her grasp. Pain shot through her body as she hit each step, her shoulder striking the rough concrete, her knee twisting as she tried to break her fall. She landed hard at the bottom of the steps, her head spinning and her body aching. For a moment she lay there stunned, trying to process what had just happened. The soldiers had pushed her. They had actually pushed her down the steps. Sarah could taste blood in her mouth, and she felt a sharp pain in her ribs every time she tried to breathe. The 3 soldiers stood at the top of the steps, looking down at her. She expected them to rush down and help her, to apologize, to call for medical assistance. Instead, they seemed frozen, as if they suddenly realized the gravity of what they had done. Sarah struggled to sit up, wincing with pain. Her professional clothes were torn and dirty. She could feel scrapes on her arms and legs where the concrete had scraped away skin, but more than the physical pain was the shock and humiliation of being treated like a criminal when she had done absolutely nothing wrong. "Help me," she called out weakly, but the soldiers just stared. Other people on the base had noticed the commotion. A few civilian workers stopped and pointed. Some soldiers in the distance had turned to look. Word was already beginning to spread that something serious had happened on the steps of the main administrative building. Sarah managed to get to her knees, then slowly stood up. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body. She looked up at the soldiers who had pushed her, and she saw something in their eyes that she hadn't expected. Fear. They looked scared. "You pushed me," she said, her voice carrying across the morning air. "You assaulted a civilian contractor." The sergeant opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. The other two soldiers took a step back. They seemed to realize that they had made a terrible mistake, but it was too late to take it back. Sarah's laptop bag lay broken at the bottom of the steps, its contents scattered across the concrete. Her presentation materials were ruined, but that was the least of her concerns now. She had been assaulted by military personnel, and there were witnesses. As she stood there, injured and shaken, Sarah had no idea that within minutes, her fall down those steps would trigger a chain of events that would reach the highest levels of military command. She didn't know that 3 generals were about to make a decision that would shut down the entire base and launch one of the most intensive investigations in Fort Henderson's history. All she knew was that her quiet Tuesday morning had turned into a nightmare, and nothing would ever be the same again. Within 5 minutes of Sarah hitting the concrete, news of the incident had reached the base communications center. A young corporal who had witnessed the entire event from across the courtyard immediately radioed his commanding officer. The report was brief but alarming. Civilian contractor assaulted by unidentified soldiers at the main administrative building. Captain Rodriguez was the first officer to respond. He had been reviewing morning reports when the radio crackled to life with news that made his blood run cold. An assault on a civilian contractor was serious enough, but the fact that it had happened in broad daylight with multiple witnesses made it a potential disaster for the base. "Get me eyes on that location immediately," Captain Rodriguez ordered, "and find out who those soldiers are. I want names, unit assignments, and their commanding officers identified within 10 minutes. As he rushed toward the scene, Rodriguez's mind raced through the potential consequences. Media attention, congressional inquiries, damage to the base's reputation, and possible criminal charges were just the beginning. But first he needed to secure the scene and ensure the injured woman received medical attention. When he arrived, Sarah was still standing at the bottom of the steps, clearly in pain, but refusing to sit down. Her torn clothing and visible injuries told the story of her fall. The 3 soldiers remained at the top of the steps, looking uncertain and increasingly nervous as more personnel gathered. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Rodriguez," he said, approaching Sarah carefully. "I need to get you medical attention immediately." "Can you tell me what happened here?" Sarah looked at him with a mixture of pain and anger. "Those soldiers pushed me down the steps. I was just trying to get to my office for a meeting, and they said they needed to question me about something. When I asked for identification and wanted to call my supervisor, they became aggressive and shoved me backward." The captain's expression grew grave. He turned toward the 3 soldiers and shouted, "You 3, get down here now!" And someone call the medics. As medical personnel arrived to tend to Sarah's injuries, Captain Rodriguez began interviewing witnesses. The corporal who had first reported the incident provided a clear account of what he had seen. A civilian maintenance worker confirmed that he had witnessed the soldiers pushing the woman. Even a delivery driver who had been unloading supplies near the building corroborated the story. But it was the security camera footage that would prove most damning. Fort Henderson had cameras positioned at every major building entrance, and the incident had been captured from multiple angles. The footage clearly showed the soldiers approaching Sarah, the brief conversation, and then the deliberate push that sent her tumbling down the concrete steps. While Sarah was being examined by medical personnel, Captain Rodriguez was on his radio with higher command. "Sir, we have a serious situation here. 3 soldiers from an unknown unit assaulted a civilian contractor. The incident was witnessed by multiple personnel and captured on security cameras. I recommend immediate involvement of senior command." Major General Patricia Hayes was in her office reviewing intelligence reports when her aide burst through the door with news of the incident. As the base's second highest ranking officer, she understood immediately that this was not just a disciplinary matter, but a potential catastrophe that could affect the entire installation. "Get me everything," she ordered. "Witness statements, camera footage, medical reports, and the identity of those soldiers. And contact General Morrison immediately. He needs to know about this." General Morrison, the base commander, was attending a classified briefing when his secure phone buzzed with an urgent message. The brief text made him excuse himself from the meeting immediately. "Civilian contractor assaulted by soldiers. Multiple witnesses. Request immediate conference." Within 20 minutes of Sarah's fall, all three generals were in the same room reviewing the preliminary reports and watching the security footage. The images were clear and undeniable. The soldiers had used unnecessary force against a civilian who posed no apparent threat. "This is unacceptable," General Morrison said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Those soldiers have not only assaulted an innocent woman, but potentially compromised the security and reputation of this entire installation." General Hayes nodded grimly. "Sir, we need to consider the possibility that this incident is connected to something larger. Why were those soldiers questioning her? Who authorized it? And why don't we have any record of them being assigned to security duties?" The third general, Brigadier General Collins, had been quietly studying the personnel files that had been rushed to the conference room. "Sir, these soldiers are not from any unit currently stationed at Fort Henderson. According to our records, they shouldn't even be on this base." This revelation changed everything. What had initially appeared to be a case of soldiers using excessive force was now looking like something far more complex and potentially dangerous. If unauthorized personnel had gained access to the base and were questioning civilian contractors, it suggested a serious security breach. "I want this base locked down immediately," General Morrison ordered. "No one enters or leaves until we understand exactly what happened here and who these people really are." The lockdown order went out across Fort Henderson within minutes. Gates were sealed, flights were grounded, and all personnel were ordered to remain at their current locations. For the thousands of soldiers, civilians, and contractors on the base, it was an unprecedented action that created immediate tension and speculation. Sarah, meanwhile, was being treated at the base medical facility. Her injuries included bruised ribs, multiple abrasions, and a possible concussion, but she was conscious and alert, and she was angry. As she lay on the examination table, she couldn't stop thinking about the way those soldiers had looked at her, as if she were some kind of threat. "Why did they want to question me?" she asked the medic treating her cuts. "I'm just a network administrator. I help soldiers call their families. What could I possibly have done wrong?" The medic had no answers, but he could see that this woman was genuinely confused about why she had been targeted. Her distress seemed authentic, and her questions suggested she had no idea why she had been singled out for questioning. As news of the lockdown spread throughout the base, rumors began to fly. Some thought it was a security drill. Others worried about a potential terrorist threat. But among the senior staff, the truth was becoming clear. They were dealing with an incident that threatened not just individual careers, but the integrity of the entire military installation. The three soldiers who had pushed Sarah were now in custody, but they weren't talking. Their silence only deepened the mystery and increased the urgency of the investigation that was about to unfold. The lockdown created an atmosphere of tension that spread through Fort Henderson like wildfire. Soldiers stopped mid-conversation to check their phones. Civilian workers huddled in groups, whispering about what might have triggered such drastic action. The base's 12,000 personnel found themselves trapped in uncertainty, knowing only that something serious had happened but not knowing what. In the base's command center, General Morrison assembled his top investigators and security personnel. The room buzzed with activity as personnel worked phones, analyzed security footage, and cross-referenced databases. The three soldiers who had assaulted Sarah remained in holding cells, refusing to speak without lawyers present. "Sir, we've identified the soldiers," Colonel Adams, the base's chief of security, announced. "According to their identification, they're Sergeant Mike Chen, Corporal David Walsh, and Private First Class Tony Ricci. But here's the problem. Our records show all three of these men were discharged from the military over 18 months ago." The room fell silent. General Morrison leaned forward in his chair, processing this information. "Are you telling me that three former soldiers using fake credentials gained access to a secure military installation and assaulted a civilian contractor?" "It appears that way, sir. We're running their fingerprints and DNA through federal databases to confirm their identities. But if our preliminary findings are correct, this represents a massive security breach." Major General Hayes was studying photographs of the three men on her tablet. "The question is, how did they get on the base? Our security system should have flagged expired credentials immediately. Someone either helped them or our systems have been compromised." Sarah, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly frustrated at the medical facility. She had been examined, treated, and cleared for release, but the lockdown meant she couldn't leave the base to go home. Worse yet, nobody would tell her why she had been targeted in the first place. "I need to call my husband," she told the nurse. "He'll be worried sick when I don't come home from work." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but all external communications have been temporarily suspended," the nurse replied sympathetically. "It's part of the lockdown protocol." Sarah felt a growing sense of panic. She was essentially a prisoner on the military base where she worked, and nobody would explain why. The fact that the entire installation had been locked down because of what happened to her made her realize that this was much bigger than a simple case of soldiers behaving badly. Dr. Emily Chen, the base psychologist, arrived to speak with Sarah about the traumatic incident. She found Sarah sitting on the edge of the examination table, staring out the window at the unusual activity outside. "How are you feeling, Sarah?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "Confused, scared, angry," Sarah replied honestly. "I keep replaying what happened over and over in my mind. Those soldiers seemed to know who I was, but I'd never seen them before. They acted like I was some kind of criminal or security threat." Dr. Chen made notes as Sarah spoke. "Can you think of anything in your work or personal life that might explain why someone would want to question you?" "Any unusual access to sensitive information or communications?" Sarah shook her head. "I maintain network infrastructure. I help soldiers video chat with their families. I update software and fix internet connections. It's not glamorous work, and it's certainly not sensitive enough to warrant this kind of attention." But even as she said it, Sarah began to think more deeply about her job responsibilities. She did have access to communication logs, network traffic patterns, and user activity data. Could someone have been using the base's communication systems for unauthorized purposes? Had she unknowingly stumbled across something she wasn't supposed to see? Back in the command center, investigators were making disturbing discoveries. The 3 fake soldiers had been on the base for at least 2 weeks, staying in guest quarters typically reserved for visiting personnel. They had been using forged orders and fake identifications that were sophisticated enough to fool multiple checkpoints. "Sir, we found something else," Lieutenant Martinez announced from her computer terminal. These 3 men had been specifically asking about Sarah Martinez for the past several days. They questioned other civilian contractors about her work schedule, her responsibilities, and her access levels. General Morrison's expression darkened. "So this wasn't random. They specifically targeted her. The question is why?" The investigation team began examining Sarah's work records with new urgency. They pulled her computer access logs, reviewed her recent projects, and analyzed every system she had worked on in the past 6 months. What they found was troubling. Sarah's work had given her access to communication patterns that revealed unusual activity on the base's networks. Late-night data transfers, encrypted communications to external servers, and network traffic that didn't match normal military operations. If Sarah had been paying attention to these patterns, she might have noticed something suspicious. "Sir, I think we need to consider the possibility that Sarah Martinez inadvertently discovered evidence of unauthorized activity on our networks," Colonel Adams suggested. "If someone was using our systems for illegal purposes, they might have wanted to silence her before she could report what she had seen." General Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "But that raises another question. If these men were working for someone else, who sent them? And are there others on the base we need to worry about?" The investigation was expanding rapidly. Security teams began conducting surprise inspections of all guest quarters and temporary housing. They reviewed access logs for the past month, looking for any other individuals who might have gained unauthorized entry to the base. Meanwhile, FBI agents were en route to Fort Henderson. The assault of a civilian contractor by individuals impersonating military personnel fell under federal jurisdiction, and the potential security implications meant that multiple agencies would soon be involved. Sarah's husband David had been calling her cell phone for hours without success. When he called the base's main number, he was told only that the installation was under temporary lockdown, and that family members would be notified when personnel could return home. The vague explanation only increased his worry. By late afternoon, the full scope of the investigation was becoming clear. What had started as an assault case was now a potential espionage investigation involving federal agencies, military intelligence, and cybersecurity experts. The 3 men in custody were no longer just assault suspects, but potential foreign agents or domestic terrorists. Sarah remained at the medical facility, unaware of how central she had become to an investigation that was growing larger by the hour. She couldn't know that her routine work maintaining computer networks had made her a target, or that her fall down those concrete steps had exposed what might be one of the most serious security breaches in the base's history. The lockdown would continue through the night as investigators worked to unravel a conspiracy that threatened not just Fort Henderson but potentially national security itself. The FBI arrived at Fort Henderson at sunset, their black SUVs cutting through the desert landscape like shadows. Special Agent Rebecca Torres led the federal team, bringing with her 15 years of experience investigating espionage cases and cybersecurity breaches. She had been briefed during the flight about the basics. 3 individuals impersonating military personnel had assaulted a civilian contractor, leading to a base-wide lockdown. But as she met with General Morrison and his staff, Agent Torres quickly realized this case was far more complex than a simple assault. The evidence suggested a coordinated intelligence operation that had been months in the planning. "General, we need to understand exactly what Mrs. Martinez had access to," Torres said, reviewing the preliminary files. "If she was specifically targeted, it means someone believed she either had information they needed or had discovered something they wanted to keep quiet." Sarah, meanwhile, had finally been allowed to call her husband. The brief conversation had been monitored and recorded, but it provided some relief to both of them. David would have to wait until the lockdown ended to see his wife, but at least he knew she was safe. "The doctors say I'm fine," Sarah told him over the secured phone line. "Bruised and scraped up, but nothing broken. I just don't understand why this happened to me." "We'll figure it out," David assured her. "Just focus on getting better. I'll be there as soon as they let me on the base." After the call, Dr. Chen continued her sessions with Sarah, trying to help her process the trauma, while also gathering information that might be useful to the investigation. Sarah's emotional state was fragile, but her memory of events remained clear and detailed. "Sarah, I need you to think carefully about your work over the past few months," Dr. Chen said gently. "Did you notice anything unusual? Any patterns in network traffic? Strange user activity or requests for information that seemed odd?" Sarah closed her eyes, trying to remember. "There was something," she said slowly. "About 6 weeks ago, I noticed some unusual data transfers happening late at night. Large files being sent to external servers. I mentioned it to my supervisor, but he said it was probably just software updates or routine backups." Dr. Chen made careful notes. "Did you investigate further? Or document what you saw?" "I kept a log of network anomalies. It's standard practice for troubleshooting. The log files are on my work computer." Sarah paused, a new thought occurring to her. "Do you think that's why those men wanted to question me? Because I noticed something I wasn't supposed to see?" The investigation team was now working around the clock. Cybersecurity experts had taken control of Sarah's computer and were analyzing months of network logs and system activity. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Someone had been systematically stealing classified information from Fort Henderson's computer networks. "The data theft has been going on for at least 4 months, reported Captain Lisa Wang, the base's chief information security officer. "Whoever did this had sophisticated knowledge of our systems and high-level access credentials. They were stealing intelligence reports, personnel files, and operational planning documents." Agent Torres studied the preliminary analysis. "The timing suggests they knew Mrs. Martinez was getting close to discovering their operation. They sent those 3 men to either recruit her or eliminate her as a threat. The 3 suspects remained in federal custody, now charged with impersonating federal officers, assault, and suspected espionage. Their real identities had been confirmed through fingerprint analysis, but their backgrounds revealed nothing obvious about who they might be working for. Sergeant Mike Chen, the leader of the group, had been discharged from the Army 2 years earlier for financial irregularities. Corporal David Walsh had a gambling problem that had cost him his security clearance. Private First Class Tony Ricci had been kicked out of the military for drug use. All 3 men had reasons to hold grudges against the military and financial motivations for betraying their country. Classic recruitment profile for foreign intelligence services, Agent Torres observed. Disgruntled former military personnel with financial problems and access to inside knowledge of military operations. The investigation expanded to include financial records, travel histories, and communications analysis. Federal agencies began tracing bank accounts, looking for payments from foreign sources or suspicious financial activity that might indicate who was paying for the espionage operation. Sarah's husband, David, finally received permission to visit the base late that evening. The reunion was emotional, with David holding his wife carefully because of her injuries. She cried as she told him about the fear and confusion she had experienced throughout the day. "I just keep thinking about how those men looked at me," she said, "like I was their enemy. I've spent 3 years helping soldiers at this base. I've never done anything to hurt anyone." David stroked her hair gently. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were just doing your job, and you happened to notice something you weren't supposed to see. That makes you a hero, not a criminal." General Morrison held a late-night briefing for senior staff, updating them on the investigation's progress. The room was tense as he outlined the scope of the security breach and its potential consequences. "We're dealing with a sophisticated intelligence operation that has compromised our networks for months," he announced. "The assault on Mrs. Martinez was an attempt to cover their tracks, but it actually exposed their entire operation." Major General Hayes raised a critical question. "Sir, how do we know the penetration is limited to these 3 individuals? If they had inside help, there could be others still operating on the base." This concern led to the expansion of the lockdown. Rather than lifting restrictions, the command decided to conduct a comprehensive security review of all personnel on the base. Everyone would be interviewed, their activities would be scrutinized, and their access credentials would be verified. The process would take days, but it was necessary to ensure that the security breach had been completely contained. For the thousands of people on Fort Henderson, it meant an extended separation from their families and normal routines. Sarah spent her second night on the base in guest quarters, unable to return home because of the ongoing investigation. She had become the key witness in a case that was rapidly becoming one of the military's most serious security breaches in recent years. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed, Sarah reflected on how quickly her life had changed. 24 hours earlier, she had been a routine network administrator looking forward to a normal day at work. Now she was at the center of an espionage investigation that had locked down an entire military installation. She couldn't sleep, thinking about the implications of what she had unknowingly discovered. Her attention to detail and dedication to her job had helped expose a serious threat to national security. But it had also made her a target and put her life in danger. The investigation was far from over, and Sarah knew that the coming days would bring more questions, more scrutiny, and potentially more danger as federal agents worked to uncover the full extent of the espionage operation that had been operating under their noses for months. By the 3rd day of the lockdown, Fort Henderson felt like a different place entirely. What had once been a bustling military installation now resembled a police state, with federal agents conducting interviews in every building and security, teams searching through years of records and computer files. Sarah had been moved to a secure facility on the base for her own protection. The FBI had determined that she remained a potential target, and until they could guarantee her safety, she would stay under military guard. The isolation was difficult, but it gave her time to work with investigators to piece together exactly what she had discovered. Agent Torres sat across from Sarah in a small conference room, surrounded by computer printouts and network analysis reports. They had been working together for hours, going through Sarah's detailed logs of network anomalies and unusual system activity. "Sarah, your documentation is incredibly thorough," Torres said with genuine admiration. "You've essentially mapped out the entire espionage operation without even realizing it. These logs show exactly when data was stolen, what systems were compromised, and how the perpetrators covered their tracks." Sarah looked at the papers spread across the table, seeing her routine work notes in a completely new light. "I was just doing my job. When something doesn't look right on the network, I document it. I never imagined it was anything more serious than maybe someone downloading movies or using too much bandwidth." "Your attention to detail may have saved lives," Torres replied seriously. The information that was stolen included troop movement plans, intelligence assessments, and tactical information that could have been used to harm American forces overseas. The investigation had revealed the full scope of the espionage operation. The 3 men who had assaulted Sarah were part of a larger network that included at least 2 other individuals still at large. Financial records showed payments from shell companies traced back to a foreign intelligence service, confirming that this was a state-sponsored operation. General Morrison was briefing senior Pentagon officials via secure video conference, explaining how a routine assault case had uncovered one of the most significant intelligence breaches in recent military history. The good news is that we've identified the full extent of the compromise, he reported. Mrs. Martinez's network logs have allowed us to trace every piece of stolen data and determine exactly what information was taken. The bad news is that some highly classified material was accessed before we discovered the breach. The Pentagon. Officials were particularly concerned about operational security. General, what's the status of ongoing missions that might have been compromised by this intelligence theft? We've issued warnings to all affected units and modified operational plans where necessary, Morrison replied. No American lives have been lost as a direct result of this breach, but we've had to significantly alter several overseas operations. Sarah's husband, David, had been allowed to stay on the base to be near his wife, but the stress of the situation was taking its toll on both of them. They spent their time in the secure facility playing cards, reading, and talking about their future. When this is over, maybe we should consider moving away from here, David suggested. Start fresh somewhere else, away from all of this. Sarah understood his concern, but she also felt a growing sense of purpose. I don't know if running away is the answer. What I discovered here was important. Maybe I can use this experience to help prevent something like this from happening again. The FBI's investigation had expanded beyond Fort Henderson. Agents were now tracking the Foreign Intelligence Network across multiple states, identifying other installations that might have been targeted. Sarah's case had become the key that unlocked a much larger operation. Agent Torres received an update that changed everything. Sarah, we've made arrests in 3 other cities. The network you helped us identify was operating at multiple military installations across the country. Your network logs provided the pattern analysis we needed to track them down. The scope of the operation was staggering. The Foreign Intelligence Service had spent years recruiting disgruntled former military personnel and placing them in positions where they could access sensitive information. Fort Henderson was just one of several targeted installations. How many other people like me were there? Sarah asked. Other civilian contractors who might have noticed something but didn't realize what they were seeing? We're interviewing hundreds of personnel at other bases now, Torres replied. Your case has taught us what warning signs to look for. You may have single-handedly disrupted one of the most sophisticated espionage operations our country has faced. The 3 men who had assaulted Sarah finally agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for reduced sentences. Their debriefings revealed details about their recruitment, training, and the specific intelligence they had been ordered to steal. Sergeant Chen, the leader of the group, explained their original plan during his FBI interview. We were supposed to approach Martinez quietly, away from cameras. The idea was to recruit her as an asset, or, if she refused, to discredit her so that anything she might report about network anomalies would be dismissed. What went wrong? Agent Torres asked. She started asking questions about our authority and wanted to call her supervisor. We panicked. The operation was supposed to be subtle, but we made it obvious and violent. That's when everything fell apart. The failed recruitment attempt had indeed been their downfall. If they had succeeded in either recruiting Sarah or discrediting her, the espionage operation might have continued for years without detection. On the 4th day of the lockdown, General Morrison finally received authorization to begin lifting restrictions. The investigation had confirmed that the security breach had been contained and normal operations could gradually resume. Sarah was called to a final meeting with the base's senior leadership. General Morrison, Major General Hayes, and Agent Torres were all present as she entered the conference room. Mrs. Martinez, General Morrison began, I want to personally thank you for your service to this country. Your professionalism and attention to detail have prevented a serious threat to national security. I was just doing my job, Sarah replied, still somewhat overwhelmed by the attention. Your job performance may have prevented attacks on American forces overseas, General Hayes added. The intelligence that was being stolen could have been used to harm soldiers in combat zones. You've literally saved lives. Agent Torres had one final request. Sarah, the FBI would like you to consider consulting with us on cybersecurity matters. Your ability to recognize unusual network patterns could be valuable in preventing future breaches. Sarah looked around the room at the senior military and federal officials who were treating her like a hero. A week ago, she had been an anonymous network administrator. Now she was being offered opportunities to serve her country at the highest levels. "I'll need to discuss it with my husband," she said carefully. "But I'm interested in learning more about how I can help." As the meeting concluded, Sarah realized that her life had been permanently changed by those few terrifying moments on the concrete steps. What had seemed like a random act of violence had actually been an attempt to silence her discovery of a major espionage operation. The lockdown was ending, but Sarah's story was just beginning. She had become an unlikely hero in the fight against foreign intelligence operations, and her future would be very different from the quiet life she had planned. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez walked into the FBI's cybersecurity training facility in Virginia, wearing a badge that identified her as a special consultant. The transformation from network administrator to federal cybersecurity expert had been remarkable, but it hadn't been easy. The trial of the 3 men who had assaulted her had concluded just 2 weeks earlier. All 3 received lengthy prison sentences for espionage, conspiracy, and assault. Their testimony had helped federal authorities dismantle the entire foreign intelligence network, leading to dozens of arrests across multiple countries. Sarah's role in exposing the operation had made her a minor celebrity in intelligence circles, but she preferred to keep a low profile. The media attention had been overwhelming, and she was grateful when the news cycle moved on to other stories. "How are you adjusting to the new job?" asked Director Patricia Williams, the FBI's head of cybersecurity operations, as they walked through the high-tech training facility. Sarah smiled, though she still felt somewhat out of place among the federal agents and cybersecurity experts. "It's been challenging but rewarding. I never imagined that my experience at Fort Henderson would lead to something like this." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change. After accepting the FBI's offer, Sarah had undergone extensive security clearance investigations, specialized training, and psychological evaluations. The assault had left her with some anxiety issues, but counseling had helped her work through the trauma. David had been supportive of her career change, though he worried about the potential dangers of her new role. They had moved to Virginia, leaving behind their quiet life near Fort Henderson for the more complex world of federal law enforcement. "Your first case briefing is in 10 minutes, Director Williams continued. "We've got a situation at a Navy shipyard in Norfolk that shows some of the same network anomalies you identified at Fort Henderson. We need your expertise to determine if we're looking at another espionage operation." Sarah felt the familiar mix of excitement and nervousness that came with each new assignment. Her unique ability to spot unusual patterns in network traffic had proven invaluable to federal investigations. In just 6 months, she had helped identify 3 potential security breaches at military installations. The briefing room was filled with analysts, investigators, and military liaisons. Sarah took her seat at the conference table, still amazed that she was now part of these high-level discussions about national security. "Ladies and gentlemen," Director Williams announced, "we have evidence of unauthorized data transfers from the Norfolk Naval Shipyard over the past 8 weeks. The patterns are similar to what Mrs. Martinez identified at Fort Henderson, suggesting we may be dealing with a related operation." Sarah studied the network analysis reports that were distributed around the table. The data patterns were indeed familiar, showing the same sophisticated techniques for hiding large file transfers and covering digital tracks. "The timing of these transfers coincides with the arrival of several new civilian contractors at the shipyard," reported Agent Johnson, the lead investigator on the case. "We've identified 5 individuals who started work there shortly before the suspicious activity began." Sarah raised her hand, still getting used to being included in these discussions. "Have you checked their background investigations? At Fort Henderson, the perpetrators used forged credentials and fake employment histories." "That's exactly what we found," Agent Johnson replied. 2 of the 5 contractors have employment histories that don't check out. Their previous employers either don't exist or have no record of employing them. The parallels to Sarah's case were striking. It appeared that the Foreign Intelligence Service had refined their tactics after the Fort Henderson operation was exposed. but they were still using the same basic approach of placing assets in positions where they could access sensitive information. Mrs. Martinez, Director Williams asked, based on your experience, how would you recommend we proceed? Sarah had learned to trust her instincts over the past 6 months. At Fort Henderson, they panicked when I started asking questions. If we approach this carefully, we might be able to gather more intelligence about their operations before making arrests, but we need to be prepared for them to react violently if they feel cornered. The investigation team spent the next several hours planning their approach. They would monitor the suspected individuals while building a comprehensive case against them. Sarah's role would be to analyze network traffic in real time, looking for patterns that might reveal the full scope of the operation. As the meeting concluded, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrifying morning when she was pushed down the concrete steps. The physical scars had healed, but the experience had fundamentally altered her understanding of her own capabilities and importance. Her phone buzzed with a text message from David. "How did the briefing go? Dinner at 7? She typed back, "Good. This case looks similar to Fort Henderson. See you at 7. Sarah gathered her materials and headed to her new office, a secure workspace filled with multiple computer monitors and advanced analysis software. The technology was far more sophisticated than anything she had used as a network administrator, but the fundamental skills were the same, paying attention to details and recognizing when something didn't look right. Director Williams stopped by her office as she was setting up for the Norfolk investigation. "Sarah, I want you to know how valuable your contributions have been. The techniques you've developed for pattern recognition are being taught to analysts across the intelligence community." "I'm just glad I can help," Sarah replied. "What happened to me at Fort Henderson was terrifying, but if it leads to preventing other attacks or protecting other people, then something good came out of it." The Norfolk Naval Shipyard investigation would take several weeks to complete, but Sarah was confident they would be successful. She had learned to trust her ability to spot the subtle signs of espionage operations, and she was committed to using that skill to protect her country. As she began analyzing the network data from Norfolk, Sarah thought about the 3 men who had changed her life by pushing her down those steps. They had intended to silence her or recruit her, but instead they had created one of the intelligence community's most effective weapons against foreign espionage. The irony wasn't lost on her. Their attempt to cover up their crimes had not only exposed their entire operation, but had also created a new expert in detecting such operations. Sarah Martinez, the quiet network administrator, had become a key figure in America's defense against cyber espionage. Her transformation was complete, but her work was just beginning. Each new case brought the possibility of preventing serious damage to national security, and Sarah was determined to use her hard-won expertise to protect the country she loved. The concrete steps at Fort Henderson had been the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. What had started as the worst day of her life had ultimately become the foundation for a career dedicated to serving something much larger than herself.